build Boston site, and today I thought we'd talk a little bit about Warmboard. We're starting to do the utilities. You can see we got a sea of Warmboard for those of you that aren't familiar with it. Warmboard is a complete radiant heating system, right? So their subfloor we actually substitute for our typical subfloor that we would put down. So a typical subfloor, for instance, is a 3/4 inch Advantech sheathing. It's pretty standardized sheathing for floor sheathing. But because we went to Warmboard and they router out the channels for the purpose of receiving the radiant tubes, they bumped the size up. So this isn't 3/4, it's actually 1 1/8. It's a 5-ply plywood, and then they router out the tube lining there, and then they line it with this aluminum facer. And the aluminum facer is a complete sheet across all of the contours of all of the tube holes. Now you can see here we've had alignment tools and such, so all these lines line up perfectly. But there are instances where we need to jump from this line over a line or around a corner or do something like that. Now, one of the beauties of working with Warmboard is they do all the layout for us. I send them my CAD drawings as the architect. They do all of the panel layout. They do all of the tubing layout, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But one of the things that I really like is when the panels were all in, our local rep, Julie from Warmboard, came by and she marked up the floor for us. So she basically went through the whole design and layout, and we're just going to jump in the bathroom here because this is probably the easiest place to see it. And she's come in and put a bunch of little semicircles, suggesting that, okay, this line jumps to that line jumps to that line. In the closet here, you can see it's the opposite. These are jumping over, and then in the bedroom beyond, that's jumping over. Now, it would be really hard to run those tubes under the bottom plates. So you basically frame the walls so they sit on top of the panels, but you come back in later and you do kind of a micro customization of a bunch of the tube runs. Now, how do we know where those go? How do we know what to use, or what type of materials can we cut that with? Well, Warmboard's way ahead of the game, right? Not only does Julie come out and mark this all up, but if we look at the plans here, you'll see they give me and or the framer a full layout of all the different panels, and they're all color coordinated here. So if the English language is a challenge for some of the framers, then they can simply color code it and, you know, have the SLRD, and it all pertains to specific panels on the sheet. So they make it real easy. They put together the puzzle for us and send it off. That all gets installed at the framing stage, and then you can see now we're at the stage where we're starting to lay out the tubing. And you can see here on the first floor we have 12 zones circulating through this. So you can see all the way up to zone 12, and some of those zones have multiple loops, right? So if we look on our loop schedule here, we'll see that zone 5 or zone 6 is actually, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 loops in zone 6. Now zone 6 is the one that makes up the better part of the great room there, so there's not a whole lot of heat loss in some of that area. So generating the heat is more about just getting that nice consistent even temperature across the floor in those larger spaces. But you can see they put in all of the lengths here. They try and limit the lengths to much shorter lengths so that the piping is obviously one continuous run, but you don't want to have a 50-foot run and a 350-foot run, because then the water's returning to the unit at a different temperature. So you want to maintain some level of consistency there. So they lay this all out for us, so the plumber and installer there is certainly ready to do the job. And then they move one step further. Like I said, they have a nice manual here that talks all about the tubing install and how the manifolds and such get put together, all of their materials and how they get put together. But they also provide the tools, right, to cut the, for example, to cut the tubing. So you don't have to go out necessarily and buy all new tools when you're working with them. They're going to supply a whole bunch of this stuff. They supply the router bits, right? So you don't have to go out and search, hey, what's the best router bit to cut through that? They've done the work for you. They've put it in here, and it's all in the installation kit. And likewise, when we talked about doing those loops, you can see they have a whole bunch of templates that they send out. So making those loop connections from one jump to the next, you could basically drop this down, pop a couple screws in there, and then router across the panel and get that customized loop connection here so that everything fits nice and neatly. Now, I've used Warmboard a number of times on projects. A lot of people say, you know, is it something that you would use regularly? What do you think? Well, what I think is maybe out of the dozen or so clients that have used it, I've never had one complaint, and it's quite the opposite. I don't think I've had any less than all of them say, yeah, I would do that again in a heartbeat. So it's one of those items that is, you know, it bumps up, you know, slightly above the required list into more of a luxury, but it's one of those things that I think when it gets installed, the homeowners just really, really appreciate it. I mean, you're touching that floor and you have that convenience of having that warmer temperature against that floor instead of the 70-degree temperature that it would normally be if you had the room set at 70 degrees. So you get that radiant feel. Here in climate zone 5, it certainly helps out in those winter months because you're walking around and, you know, your feet are one of the coldest parts on your body, and putting it up against that heat, well, yeah, that's a luxury that a lot of people would love to have, and a lot of people are starting to use this product pretty regularly. We're seeing it get used more and more with every project. Now, one of the other interesting things about this project here is that they've actually devised a complete heat system on the electrical side. So we actually have a heat pump that is an air-to-water heating system that is going to heat all of the tubes, all of the water that circulates through those tubes via an electric heat pump. So they're moving in that direction. We're going to be one of the first houses in the country to have that system in here. So stay tuned for more on that later. But for now, that's the Warmboard system. That's the Warmboard system installed. That's their beautiful installation kit. I'm Steve Bazek. This is the Build Show Build Boston site. Until next time, long live our buildings.